Thanks so much, guys. That animation, the perfect prelude to a chat right now as we celebrate the voices of young people today. And registered counsellor and friend of ours on the show, Shanaz Moos, joins us to talk about the importance of educating our young people about the past and how they can use lessons from past struggles to move the country forward. As much as we want to feel like we are giving them the future, they're going to have to build and take that future. And this is, I think, one area as a parent, I feel the weight of responsibility probably the most. Shanaz, thank you so much. As a parent who's gone through so many of these lessons ahead of me, I get great counsel out of you in these kinds of moments. And this day should be revered. It should be remembered with a great sense of emotion, but we also want to inspire young people to move forward. But lest we forget why we commemorate this day, how do we go about doing this? Explain to a young person, our child, what Youth Day is actually all about.
So we all know that kids learn about it at school, and there's massive events often that take place. So I think that that's like a factual, boring, oh, we have to. We ask, what is this? It's a public holiday. What's it called? Youth Day. Why is it called Youth Day? Next thing they say, that only name they will probably remember, and he wasn't the only one, is Hector Peterson.
Yeah.
So they can string those facts together, but that's about it. They don't. So I think with the passion of the event, man, it was the turning point in our country, led not by adults, but by teenagers. So here's my trick question that I was prepping you for. How old was Hector Peterson when he died?
You know, I want to say, because it looks like a group of older, more empowered students, so I want to say 17, 16 at the youngest.
So my husband and I had an argument about it as I prepped yesterday, which is why I looked it up properly. He was 12. 12?
That's a child still. That's
and I've got a 13-year-old about to be 14-year-old that's like, make me noodles, make me, I can't. And I'm thinking, I want to shout at him, Hector Peterson, you need to read up on that.
So how do we capture this then? Because that is in itself heartbreaking, yes, but it's empowering that an adolescent, that a child that young will be strong enough to stand up, and as so many did on that day. So how do we inspire that same sense of strength and confidence in the young people today? Because maybe we've reached that point now where we have to entrust young people with kind of giving it that extra, that voice that's missing, because there's certainly something missing right now.
Yeah, so I think, you know what, if you look at what propelled June 16th, it was like massive change was coming, change that put teenagers at a disadvantage, being forced to take on a language that wasn't theirs, being forced to take on so many things. And I think they just got frustrated because as much as their parents were accepting it, they had to live it. They had to go to school. They had to... There was even one thing I read about having to repeat grade 7. So even if they passed, they had to go back and do it again.
In Afrikaans.
So it was like this insaneness of everything. And that... I was thinking as I drove here that I had to apply for my own university on my own. I'm the first one in my family. My sister went to teacher training college, which was quite a different application process, but there was no one to help me. So what did I do as a 16-year-old? I had to learn. And I think that's the shift between 1976 and now. We take over too much for our kids, and we create learned helplessness.
Let's flip that around and say, in this year, and I'm in no way drawing a comparison between apartheid and COVID-19, in no way. But in terms of the end result, having a mass effect, and what that can inspire in a group of young people. You have spoken to me at length about how young people have changed their way of thinking, how they perceive the world, what they want to do with their lives. Your own daughter's now wanting to do psychology. I know at your great disdain. But is there not an opportunity now? Are kids not, with their access to digital, access to information, are they not more empowered now than they ever have been to be that change and do something about their own situation?
I think yes, in the sense that they're empowered by all the access to certain things, but also it's parents don't understand that the way children is different. So much is online. So what looks like maybe gaming is actually a social meetup of friends playing a game together. So that's like a friends meeting in the park equivalent. So the attitude parents have about technology and being online, it's like this fight instead of like, let's work together. What cool stuff is there? There are courses online for kids. There are so many things that they can do. And the other thing is, not every child will go to university. We mustn't go down that road.
It's not necessarily the right path.
But every child has a natural gift.
Yeah.
That is up to the parents to nurture. So, like I was saying, I thought my daughter's was art, but it wasn't. She just told me outright, that's not why.
She might just be good at it, but it's not what drives her
Yeah, she is amazing at it. But my thing is that nurture what is there, and that could be where the entrepreneurship skills. So if a child is good at baking,
yeah, and
you know?
we want our kids to be insanely rich so they can look after us in our old age. Come on, that's the whole point here. Thank you so much for that. We're going to continue our discussion. I'm really interested to hear about and maybe understand more about the knock-on effect of what we've been through over the last year. We feel the trauma of it. We're starting to process these things emotionally. How are our kids going through that space as well in our efforts to empower young people, because it is Youth Day, a day to think about exactly that.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. Thanks so much for rejoining what is a vitally important conversation. A little bit earlier, we spoke about empowering young people of today who feel maybe disheartened due to COVID-19 and the high numbers of unemployment, probably at a record high at the moment. What can we as parents do? Where do they fit into it when it comes to commemorating the 1976 Soweto uprising, which we need to remember as an anchor, if you will? Registered Councillor Shanaz Moos joins us to continue the conversation. We're thinking about this on levels, because you have to, and there is an historical component that I don't want to drift away. I don't want to make it about too much about now, because today is very much about remembering then and how important that moment was as a turning point in the consciousness of the country and the Black consciousness movement in itself. How do we make our children aware of this, have that conversation and get them to the heart of it? Because surely we also still need to reflect on that and understand it. What are the words that we use? How do we discuss what happened on that day, especially with a child that's coming into their own, maybe in that adolescence, as many of the kids at that age? I can't believe Hector Peterson was 12 years old.
So if anything you take away from that today, that will be that
start the conversation a little bit earlier than you.
So I think that, you know, when we look back at that, there's so much power was no, it wasn't given, it was taken. They took the power and they decided we are in charge of our own destiny. So we want to tell our kids about the power that you have, like the short animation where this child was being forced into an adult world, but she had dreams and she could fly. And that's essentially the self-belief. So changing the current circumstances is what they did in 1976, and it went on for more than a decade. It had such a massive impact on the rest of the country
and the world.
The parties in exile, for instance, that activated all of that. So it wasn't like, oh, we don't want to go to school, which is what children may think, let's all go ride. It was like, we are unhappy with what we've been given. You know, let's propel our own future into the direction that we want. So this is what that means, that children have power. Our children have power to change and move their life, not to play Fortnite 24 hours a day, but in a way that...
man, you might be changing the world through Fortnite. You never know, man.
I'm not knocking it, you know.
No, for sure. Well, that brings me to my next point, is how do we then transfer that notion to the current context? How do you suggest young people of today utilize that power to bring about a change?
So obviously, that was their challenge then, but what is a youth's challenge now? We're still struggling with the highest unemployment rate amongst youth. It actually went up quite drastically with COVID. So you asked about COVID and that the youth unemployment rate just went like...
I mean, I've heard a terrible statistic that between 10 and 20% of students weren't eating throughout hard lockdown. And you kind of think, oh, but you're a student, you've got means.
No,
they don't.
Yeah.
And this is the reality. So many school children, the only meal that they're getting is at school. The only meal that they're getting is at varsity because of whatever support structures exist there. So it's easy to point a finger at the past and say there was a big, bad wolf that we can blame for it. But now it's more difficult to kind of harness and focus that aggressive energy, and that's something that can drive us forward. So how do we then inspire young people to make that shift, to utilize their digital platform, to utilize whatever tools that they have now to be that voice? Do they speak to other young people? Do they speak to their parents? Do they start a group, a blog? How do we do that?
So, I mean, if you look at what are kids unhappy with? I think it's the fact that school, the regimented way they're being taught, no individual thinking is allowed. You know, the things that we need in adulthood aren't given in teenage years or even early childhood. So we want them to understand that what are you not happy with? Then we have to help them, I think, with this mobilize. So how do we go? Social media is like a massive platform that they're much better with. Create an awareness campaign, or whatever it is, do something, but they don't believe that they have power to do that. So for me, the problem with youth is, and I see it in the counseling I do, there's a huge feeling of being disempowered. Very controlling parents who are fear parenting, and parents who are guilt parenting. You will study, you will, and you will. Not who are you, what would you like to do? And when you raise kids, we should raise the youth to be, how can you change the world?
Yeah.
What is so special about you, Graham, that changes the world?
What Greta's done.
You know,
I mean, there are kids out there that are literally changing the world every day.
Exactly.
I need a podcast. I need an hour-long podcast to be able to get through
with singing
half
and
of
dancing.
But as always, looking at our children, we hold up a mirror to ourselves. And I think this conversation starts with ourselves. Maybe do a bit of research yourself today. We might have forgotten the important elements from what we learned in history. The fact that Hector Peterson was 12 years old when he was killed on that fateful day in 1974. That, for me, is enough to spark an entirely different conversation. Start thinking about it now. How can you get to the heart of this matter with your own child?